I'm Alex, 27, and I guess if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said my family was complicated, but manageable. I lived with my mom and younger brother, Jamie, in a modest two-story house just outside of town. My dad had passed away when I was 16, and ever since, it felt like something in the air at home had curdled. My mom, once warm and upbeat, gradually became sharp-tongued, quick to criticize, and colder than the winters we braved in that creaky house. Still, I stuck around. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe out of hope. Or maybe because I foolishly believed that if I just helped out enough, financially, emotionally, they'd see me, appreciate me, love me again. I was working remote IT jobs, juggling freelance contracts, and bringing in enough to cover more than half of the household bills. Mortgage? I paid it. Utilities? Usually me. Groceries? Split down the middle, if not more, since Jamie was still in school and my mom worked part-time at the local library. I never complained. I didn't mind being the one who steadied the ship. At least, not at first. But slowly, the small slights turned into biting remarks. My mom's dismissiveness evolved into contempt. It started with eye rolls and sighs when I spoke. Then she'd talk over me during dinner, ignore my opinions, act like I was just taking up space. Jamie followed suit, not out of malice, I think, but because it was easier to nod along with her than risk being her next target. I kept telling myself, just give it time. Maybe she was grieving. Maybe Jamie was just a dumb teenager. But it kept getting worse. Once, I came back from a 14-hour overnight network repair shift, exhausted. I was practically bleeding from screen strain, only to find Jamie had taken the last of the food I'd prepped for the week, and my mom had the nerve to say, "He's growing. Don't be so selfish." I bit my tongue. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just quietly reheated a can of soup and sat in silence while they watched some sitcom and laughed like nothing was wrong. Then came that night. It was late, close to midnight. I was coming in from the back door, careful not to wake anyone, but the light from the living room was still on. I paused in the hallway. I heard voices. My mom and Jamie. "Honestly, I don't know what we're going to do with him," she said. Her voice wasn't even hushed. "He just sulks around. He's 30 and still here. Still here." Jamie laughed. "He's only 27. She scoffed. "Might as well be 70. He just drags us down. Always acting like the martyr. But really, he's just a burden. I'd breathe easier if he finally moved out. We'd all be better off without him." There was a silence. Then Jamie mumbled something I didn't quite catch, and she sighed dramatically. I should have never let him stay this long. I didn't move. I just stood there, the grocery bag still in my hand, slowly feeling the plastic dig into my fingers. I didn't make a sound. Didn't storm in. Didn't call them out. I just backed away, heart pounding, stomach in knots. I went to my room, locked the door, and stared at the wall until the sun started rising. The next day, I didn't say anything. Neither did they. My mom left for work, Jamie disappeared off to class or his girlfriend's place, and I sat at the kitchen table for nearly 2 hours, just thinking. Replaying those words. A burden. We'd be better off without you. I guess that was the moment something in me broke. Not with a bang. Not with anger. But with quiet, terrifying clarity. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just packed. For 3 days, I prepped everything in silence. Transferred my contracts to a temporary P.O. box. Canceled the auto transfers I'd been using to pay the mortgage and bills. Collected every receipt, every document proving I'd been carrying this house on my back. I left a small stack of them in the drawer next to the fridge. Nothing dramatic, just the facts. On the 4th morning, before anyone else was up, I wheeled out my 2 bags, slipped my key on the hook, and left. No note. No scene. No goodbye. I moved into a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, view of the alley. But it was mine. Quiet. Peaceful. The silence wasn't heavy like at home. It was light. Clean. I didn't realize how suffocated I'd been until I had air again. For the first week, nothing happened. I didn't hear from them. I figured maybe they were relieved. Maybe they didn't even notice. Then came the 2nd week. A couple of missed calls from my mom, no voicemails. Just her name flashing on my screen like a warning light. I didn't pick up. Then, 2 weeks after I left, I got the text. It was from Jamie. "Hey, why did the mortgage bounce?" Mom's freaking out. I stared at it for a long time. I could have explained. I could have pointed out how I'd been the one holding up the house like some kind of unpaid contractor. But I didn't. I just replied, "Guess you'll have to manage without your burden." No emojis. No anger. Just a simple echo of her words. He didn't reply. Not that day. But 3 days later, I drove past the house out of sheer curiosity. It was nighttime, and most of the windows were dark. The porch light was off. A single dim bulb flickered in what used to be my room. I sat in my car across the street, watching as one by one, the lights went out. The house, it just looked hollow. I'd spent so long trying to be what they needed, to give them stability, warmth, anything resembling love. And when I stopped, the silence was louder than any confrontation could have been. And that's when something happened that made everything spiral, something that proved they weren't just ungrateful. They were entitled. A few days after that drive-by, I started getting emails, ones I hadn't expected. Not from Jamie, not from my mom, but from the mortgage company. Apparently, my name was still listed as the co-signer on the refinancing my mom had insisted on 4 years earlier, back when she swore up and down it was just for better rates and that we'd all benefit. I had trusted her. I didn't realize the extent to which she'd tied me to that house, to that debt. I hadn't even thought to check. Why would I? I'd been paying it without question for years. But now that the payments had stopped, they were coming after the next name on the list. Mine. I didn't panic, but I did feel that familiar heat, rage mixing with shame. She knew what she'd done. She had no problem calling me a burden while having me legally anchored to her sinking ship. So I called the mortgage office, politely, and asked what my options were. The woman on the line, Amber, bless her heart, was patient as I explained the situation. She confirmed I was a co-signer, which meant if they defaulted and foreclosure began, it could wreck my credit, not just hers. That's when I realized walking away wasn't enough. I had to untangle myself completely. I started documenting everything, pulled my payment history from my bank, gathered every invoice, every monthly statement that showed the payments came from my account, made copies of our original refinancing documents. Amber even sent me copies of their correspondence attempts, emails, and physical notices that apparently been ignoring. Then I lawyered up. It cost me a few thousand I hadn't planned on spending, but it was worth every penny. My lawyer, a woman named Priya who had this calm, ruthless energy, assured me we could build a case to release me from any future responsibility tied to the mortgage, especially given the fact that I'd been the only one paying it for nearly 4 years. While that process unfolded, my phone started buzzing more frequently. At first, it was just Jamie again. Mom's freaking out. What's going on with the house? Then, I thought you were still helping with that? I ignored him. Then my mom finally broke her silence. We need to talk. That's it. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a flat demand. I didn't respond. The next text came an hour later. You've always been dramatic. I never said we didn't love you. You misunderstood. Don't ruin this family over a tantrum. I laughed out loud when I read it. A tantrum. As if quietly leaving, cutting off financial support, and hiring a lawyer was the equivalent of a child stomping their feet over a toy. 2 days later, a knock came at my apartment door. It was Jamie. He looked thinner, tired. Still had that same smug attitude in his posture, though, like he expected me to fall in line just because he showed up in person. Can we talk? He asked, eyes darting past me like he was expecting someone else to be inside. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. You left us, he said, as if I'd abandoned a ship mid-voyage and not one that had been sinking long before I ever climbed aboard. You mean after Mom said you'd be better off without me? She didn't mean it. I stared at him. Did you say anything to her when she did? Silence. She was stressed, he said finally. She says a lot of stuff she doesn't mean. So do I said, folding my arms. Like when I said I'd pay for the mortgage. Guess I didn't mean that either. His face twisted. So what? You're just going to let the house go under? Let us get kicked out? Not my house, I replied. I paid for it. I didn't own it. You think Mom would have given me even 1% if she ever sold it? He had no answer to that. She said I was a burden, I continued, voice steady. So I took that seriously. I removed the burden. I left. She got what she wanted. His voice rose slightly. You could have at least warned us. You're making everything worse. I raised an eyebrow. Worse for who? Jamie rubbed his face, clearly frustrated. She's not eating. She's barely sleeping. She's scared, man. We're both scared. For a moment, I almost felt something stir in me. Guilt, maybe. Or pity. But then I remembered the way she'd laughed that night, how casually they dismissed me like I was some broken appliance they couldn't wait to throw out. I just nodded and said, you'll figure it out. You always said you didn't need me. Guess it's time to prove it. That night, they started blowing up my phone. I turned it off. The next day, my lawyer called. Priya had filed the motion to remove me from the mortgage liability. Based on the documentation we submitted, it was looking strong. Best case, I'd be severed cleanly. Worst case, I might have to settle some portion, but I'd no longer be tied to them. And then something unexpected happened. My mom showed up at my workplace. It was embarrassing, to say the least, her standing at the front desk, arms folded, eyes darting around with that same wounded, self-righteous look she always wore when things didn't go her way. I was called out to the lobby. The moment she saw me, her face softened, almost like she'd rehearsed the expression. I didn't know what else to do, she said quietly. I said nothing. Everything's falling apart. The mortgage is months behind. They're threatening foreclosure. Jamie's failing school. I don't know how we got here. I tilted my head. You really don't? She flinched at that. I was upset when I said that. You know I didn't mean it. I was stressed. The bills, the pressure. You called me a burden. You know I didn't mean. I heard you, I said, my voice sharp now. You didn't say it in anger. You weren't yelling. You said it like a fact, like something you'd always believed. Don't pretend it was some moment of weakness. She looked around, suddenly aware we weren't alone. A few of my coworkers had peeked their heads out. Can we go somewhere to talk? She asked, her voice almost breaking. And for the first time in my life, I saw her not as my mother, but as someone who had used me, who had counted on my loyalty, my silence, and my guilt to keep me chained to a life that only benefited them. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. There's nothing left to talk about. She stared at me like she didn't understand the words. And then I turned around and walked back inside. The next time I saw the house, it was listed for auction. About a week after the office incident, I got an official-looking envelope in the mail from the bank. Not forwarded from my old address, sent directly to me. Inside was confirmation that my legal detachment from the mortgage had been approved. Clean break. I read the words twice, then a third time, expecting to feel triumphant, maybe even celebratory. But all I felt was stillness. Not sadness. Not regret. Just a silence where the weight used to be. A few days later, a former neighbor texted me. She used to live 3 doors down from my mom's place and would sometimes chat me up if I was outside fixing something or walking to my car. We weren't close, but we got along. Her message was short. Just saw a big red sign in your old yard. Everything okay? I knew exactly what she meant. I didn't need a photo. The foreclosure had gone through. I didn't reply. 2 nights after that, Jamie called again. I didn't pick up. Then he texted. We're getting kicked out. Mom won't stop crying. She says this is your fault. I stared at the screen. Then I turned off my phone and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. That same night, I had a dream. One of those vivid ones that feel more like a memory than imagination. I was back in the house, walking through the halls, but everything was covered in dust, like it had been abandoned for years. I could hear voices, faint and echoing. My mom calling me for dinner. Jamie asking for help with homework. The sounds of a family that used to pretend it functioned. But every door I opened led to a room I didn't recognize. And every time I turned back, the hallway was longer, darker. I woke up with my heart racing and a sharp pain in my chest. Not fear, exactly. Just a tight, clenching sadness that surprised me with how deep it still ran. Even after everything they said, after how they treated me, it was still my home once. That stupid beige paint on the walls, the cracked tile in the kitchen I patched with super glue, the dent in the fridge door Jamie caused when he got mad over a canceled concert. I remembered every inch of that place. It hadn't just been a house. It had been my life. And now it was gone. But what made it bearable, what let me breathe again, was the knowledge that I wasn't gone with it. I had escaped. Still, the story didn't quite end there. A few days after the auction sign went up, I received another message. This one wasn't from Jamie. It was from an unknown number. But I recognized the writing immediately. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please call me. Just those 7 words. It was my mom. I sat there for a long time, staring at the message. Something in it felt different. Not because of the words themselves. People like her knew how to weaponize apologies when the consequences hit. But the timing. The fact that she hadn't contacted me since the office incident. That Jamie had done all the begging and pleading up until now. That she was finally reaching out herself. For the first time in a while, I felt unsure of myself. Was this real? Had she finally seen the damage she'd done? Or was this just her trying to climb out of the wreckage she helped cause? I didn't reply. Not immediately. I let the message sit. I needed time to think, to feel it out. Every instinct told me to be cautious. This was the same woman who once looked me in the eye and said I dragged the whole family down. The same woman who had let me carry her bills, her house, her life, and still saw me as expendable. And yet, I remembered being 10 years old and watching her cry at the kitchen table after my dad left. I remembered how she used to tuck me in, kiss my forehead, and whisper, "You're my strong one." I remembered the version of her that made grilled cheese on rainy days and danced barefoot in the kitchen to Fleetwood Mac when the house felt too heavy. Had that woman ever really existed? Or had I just imagined her into someone I could survive? I didn't know. But what I did know was this. The moment I answered that message, if I answered it, I was opening a door that might never close again. And part of me was afraid I'd step through it and lose everything I had finally begun to build for myself. So I made a decision. I wouldn't answer yet, but I would go see the house. One last time. I needed to look at it. Not out of nostalgia. Not even for closure. I just needed to see, with my own eyes, the place where everything had fallen apart and where I had finally chosen myself. I got in my car that afternoon and drove the familiar roads. Past the gas station I used to walk to. Past the park Jamie used to skate in. Past the grocery store where I spent too many Friday nights scanning coupons so we could eat something decent. When I turned the corner onto our old street, the house came into view. But what I saw made me slam the brakes. Because someone was outside. And they weren't alone. It was late afternoon, that golden hour where everything looks softer than it should, where even the sharp edges of pain seem briefly wrapped in warm light. I sat behind the wheel, halfway down the block, staring at the scene in front of me. The lawn looked overgrown, patchy in places. The shutters hung crooked like they'd started falling apart, and no one cared enough to fix them. But what caught my attention wasn't the state of the house. It was the people standing outside it. Jamie was on the porch, pacing. My mom sat on the top step, elbows on her knees, rubbing her forehead like she was trying to hold her head together. They didn't notice me at first. I hadn't pulled into the driveway, just parked far enough away to watch. There was a foreclosure sign stabbed into the grass, slightly tilted. A couple of boxes sat near the curb, rain-stained and buckling at the corners. It looked like someone had tried to drag them inside but given up halfway. They looked small. Not physically. I mean, Jamie still stood at 6 feet, still carried that effortless athletic frame. But in that moment, they both looked reduced. Like people who had finally run out of excuses. There was a hollow stillness around them, and for the first time, I wasn't the one holding the weight. I don't know how long I sat there before Jamie noticed me. He squinted in my direction, then started walking toward the car. I considered driving off, just pressing the gas and disappearing again. But something in me said, no, not this time. You end this. You look it in the eye. I got out of the car slowly. Jamie reached me first. You came, he said, voice uncertain. He looked thinner than I remembered. There were circles under his eyes, his jaw slightly clenched like he was holding in more than he knew how to say. I saw the text, I replied. In the house. He nodded. It's bad. I raised an eyebrow. So I've gathered. We stood in silence. A few birds chirped somewhere nearby. Kids were laughing in the distance, normal life continuing just out of reach. She's not doing well, Jamie said. The bank gave her 60 days. That's all. She texted me, I said. He nodded. She didn't know what else to do. She's been different lately. Quiet. Keep saying she didn't mean it. I don't care if she meant it, I said evenly. She said it. And more importantly, she believed it enough to treat me like it was true for years. She's sorry. I'm not interested in apologies that only show up when the consequences do. He looked down. I'm sorry too, he said, and that surprised me. You weren't just a bystander, I told him. You laughed with her that night. I know, he whispered. And I hate myself for it. I was stupid. She made it so easy to pile on. It was like, the more we made you the problem, the more she felt okay about everything else. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that would undo it. But I appreciated the honesty, even if it was a few years too late. Then my mom stood up. She didn't come down the steps. She just looked at me, arms crossed over her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. You look healthier, she said, voice softer than I'd heard it in years. I didn't answer. I don't blame you, she continued. You were good to us. Better than we deserved. I just kept looking at her. Waiting. I said awful things, she admitted, taking a shaky breath. I believed awful things. Because I didn't want to face how much I'd come to depend on you. How much of my life was being held together by your quiet, patient effort. And when you left, I felt betrayed, but I knew I'd pushed you there. The wind blew lightly. A plastic grocery bag fluttered across the street. "You can hate me," she said. "You'd be right too. I just needed to say it. And if you never speak to me again, I'll understand." That was the first real thing she'd said in years. And for a moment, I felt the weight of it all, the years of resentment, the emotional manipulation, the bone-deep exhaustion of being the scapegoat and the savior at the same time. It pulsed in my chest like a bruise being pressed, but not broken. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "But I don't trust you either." Her face twitched like she'd been bracing for impact. "I needed to leave. Not just the house. You. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't what you said I was. That I was capable of more than just filling in the holes you both refused to patch." "And you did," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "I did." We stood in silence again, the three of us suspended in the awkward air between past and present. I looked at the boxes, the crumbling steps, the dead porch light. I walked up and stopped just before the top step. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope, not dramatic, not some grand reveal. Just a quiet gift I'd been considering ever since Priya told me I was free. I handed it to her. "What's this?" "Information," I said. "Legal aid services. Housing assistance programs. A local food bank. And Jamie's got that part-time job, right?" He nodded slowly. "I don't owe you this," I said, "but I also don't want you to be on the street. This is the only help I'm offering. No money. No coming back. Just the first steps, if you want them." She took the envelope like it was made of glass. "Why?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "Why give us anything?" "Because I'm not you," I said. "Because even after everything, I don't want to be the kind of person who kicks someone when they're already down. But this is the last act of kindness I have to give." Jamie looked away, wiping at his face. And I turned around. I walked back to my car without looking back. I drove away with the windows down, letting the air rush in. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt clean. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the family's emotional sponge. No longer the quiet fixer. I was just me. And I liked who that was becoming. In the months that followed, I didn't hear much. A few messages from Jamie now and then, updates that they'd found a small apartment through one of the services I'd recommended. That mom was seeing someone at the community center for counseling. That he was applying to university programs again. I didn't reply to most of them, but I read them. And I hoped, in my own quiet way, that maybe, they were finally learning what it meant to stand on their own. As for me, I got promoted. I moved into a better place. I started going to therapy myself. I met someone who didn't look at me like I was broken, who didn't expect me to carry their world just to be worthy of space in it. And sometimes, when I pass by old neighborhoods or hear a familiar Fleetwood Mac song, I still feel that old pain tug at the edges of my peace. But I remind myself that walking away wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything that finally made me whole. And that's the real ending. Not revenge. Not silence. Just freedom.